morning, friends. I hope this daily connection finds you well. As I've been speaking with folks and asking questions about what are we doing in these days and who are we turning to in these days, podcasts seem to be a familiar thing, a familiar and popular thing to turn to. We have lots of time to just sit and listen. And if there's anything that's going to come out of this is the opportunity to sit and listen, or at least to take that opportunity to sit and listen. Somebody mentioned to me Brene Brown has a new podcast, and Brene Brown is always a good go-to individual. One I've been picking up and listening to lately is Kate Bowler in her podcast Everything Happens, as well as good old Oprah Super Soul. She has some great guests that she interviews. I was struck, though, by the podcast I listened to from Kate Bowler the other day, where she was talking about fear in this moment in time, fear and anxiety that we as individuals are feeling. And it's hard not to feel this way. What happens comes to the forefront of questions. What happens if we get this illness? What happens if our kids get sick? What happens if our beloveds get sick? It is fear-provoking, anxiety-provoking, and all of that. And yet one of her guests on her podcast had talked about how at times it's easy for us to say, you know, God lets things happen for a reason. And how just that is not helpful to think that God would allow our loved ones to get sick, or that God allowed someone to die because of this, that, and the other thing. But instead, this person had talked about purpose and how this matters, and how when we look at an event such as this, we should be taking stock and measure of the things to learn, how we can do our science better, how we can do our data collection better, how we can be in conversation better with those in the medical professions as to things that they need. It's also bringing to the forefront our medical system and our care for those in the justice system, and how racism has peaked its ugly head in these moments, where we are talking about the rate of infection within our African American communities and how it has skyrocketed. There are lots of truths that are coming out of this, and those truths have always been there. And yet now it is an opportunity for us to seize the day to make sure that these things do not get shoved under stacks of paper and lost. That this stuff matters, and it matters for us to start digging in and asking the questions. Why? How can we do this better? And as faith communities, if we truly are to love ourselves as we love to love our neighbors as we love ourselves, how can we go about doing that? Really doing that. I'm also mindful of how supply trains are coming into effect, where farmers are dumping milk, and farmers in Florida have fields of tomatoes that are rotting on the vine because there isn't a way to get those items to people. And I think there are ways. We're just not thinking about the best ways to do that. And my cynical self often talks about, well, there's just not enough money to be made. That's why things are being plowed under. That's why milk is being dumped. And that could be true to an extent. And yet we're not asking the questions of how can we get from point A to point B. And maybe we do have to ask the question, does everyone always have to make a significant amount of money? What about the greater good about feeding people and making sure that bellies are full so that there aren't lines of cars to food distribution centers so that they can get food for their families? There are a lot of things coming to the forefront in this time. This time is allowing us to listen, and we need to take that time to listen, for it matters. In this moment, it matters. There's my soapbox for today. It is our purpose-driven life in this moment, to take some language from Rick Warren, that our life is filled with purpose, and it matters for us to figure this out in order for us to be human to each other. For that is what God has called us to be. My friends, I hope you are well on this day. I hope God's light and love shine upon you, and I'll see you tomorrow.